Here we go. People coming in already. Good evening, people. Thank you for joining us. So this evening's webinar is going to be with Robin Elias from Unusual Rigging, and we've also got Nicky Greet joining him. So far we've got 15 coming in. We've got Anne, Brian, another Brian, Chris, another Chris, Darren, Gareth, Gary, Gavin, Jack, John. Thank you all for coming in and joining us. Sean, Steve. So just to let you know, we've got a Q&A section on here. So if you click on there, you can submit questions to Robin and to Nicky. I will then read those questions out for you, and I can also ask you guys to unmute yourselves. We can unmute you. You can ask your question yourself. So far with the Fireside chats, we've spoken to Brian Raven and Dave Ridgway. We've spoken to Heather Penn. We've also spoken to John Simpson. And if you want to watch any of those, you can go onto our YouTube channel, We Make Events, and all of those previous videos are up on there. Our recent one was with Andy Doherty, and that should be getting uploaded soon as well. So you can watch that back. If you want to find out more about We Make Events, please visit wemakeevents.com. We've got all the information about the campaign, about the fundraising activities that we've been doing, how you can donate to those, and all of the previous campaigns that we've been doing. Just looking, see who else we've got coming in. What are we on? We're on 19. So we've got some slides this evening, which Robin's going to explain to us. So he's going to be talking about his rock and roll days. Going to be talking about unusual rigging and some of the projects that he's worked on over the years. I've already had a chance to have a chat with Robin and go through these slides, and some of them are just mind-boggling when you see them, and you just think, how on earth did you come up with that? How on earth did you work out how to do that? So again, if you've got any questions like that, drop them into the Q&A and I will happily read them out for you. So I think we're at 20 at the moment coming in. I can already see people dropping questions in. That's great. We know that's working. We will ask those questions as we progress. I think we're expecting a good audience today as well. So if you do have a question, you can also raise your hand as a participant. So if you've got a question that you want to ask out loud, you can obviously do that as well, and we can then unmute you. So what time are we on? We are 18:35. I think we've got a few more to come in yet. So I'll give it just a couple more minutes and then we shall make a start. So, and remember, if, you know, don't be shy. If you do have a question, obviously you can raise your hand. You can type it into the Q&A. What we found with these chats is the more questions you guys ask, the more engaging we find them to be. I can only ask so many questions before I run out of ideas and run out of questions. So I'm relying on you guys to help me out here and give me some great questions to read out. So we've hit 25 and what are we on? We're on 1836. So let's make a start. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to yet another Fireside Chat. As I said, we've done quite a few of these now. We did one with John Simpson talking about backup. We've done one with Brian Raven and Dave Ridgway talking about the lighting industry. We've spoken to Andy Doherty about the sound industry, Heather Penn about her career in sound. And tonight we are going to talk to Robin Elias from Unusual Rigging about his career in rock and roll and about the rigging projects that Unusual have done. If we'd like to bring on Robin, please, John. Hi, Robin. You can unmute yourself for us. Good evening. How are you? You well?
I'm very well, thank you very much. And thank you for everyone who's turned up to listen to a load of old nonsense, which I'm going to speak. I have to start by saying, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, unless there's any danger of being sued, in which case I won't comment.
Of course, of course. So I'm going to start the slides for you, Robin. We can discuss these. So obviously you're the technical director of Unusual Rigging.
Yes, sir.
But before you did that, you had quite a long career in rock and roll as a freelancer. If we jump to the next slide, there is just a long list here of people that you've worked for over the years. And this slide just goes on and on and on of bands and artists that you've worked with over the years. What highlights from this list would you say are the real key ones that jump out at you?
Well, I started my career off as a lighting man, and just got a couple of stories from that few years. One of which was that I did a few tours with Uriah Heep as lighting crew chief, and inexplicably they promoted me to lighting designer for an American tour. So off I went. I was absolutely useless. And after the 3 weeks in the States, which was very pleasant, almost a holiday for me, on my return, I was summoned to the manager's office, and he said he had good news and bad news for me. I asked him to continue. He said, firstly, you're fired. And I said, okay, and what's the bad news? And he said, the bad news is that when you signed your contract, I gave you the wrong contract. I gave you a band member's contract instead of a technician's contract. And he handed me one of the largest checks I've ever seen in my life. So ironically, for 3 weeks of doing something which I was absolutely useless at, I got very well paid. Another story that springs to mind was that I was Frank Sinatra's lighting crew chief and board operator for a European tour, and it finished off at the Royal Albert Hall, half an hour or so before the gig, where we had only washers for the orchestra and 4 follow spots for Frank. I managed to blow up the lighting desk. I rushed out of the building with it under my arm, much to everyone's horror. Hot-footed it across London, picked up another one from the office and returned to the Royal Albert Hall and followed the orchestra onto the stage, put the desk down behind the PA stack, plugged it in, put my headsets on and heard go and brought up the fader and it worked. That would have been concrete boots. Anyway, after a few tours as a lighting man, one rigging came along. The need for riggers came along. We started using genie towers, which are these ridiculous things, pneumatic, I'm sure you're all familiar with them. So during the show, the pressure would drop, the towers would drop down, making the guy lines go slack. So apart from dropping down, they'd then turn to a strange angle, lighting backstage. Bit of a joke. Then we upped our game and moved to vermets, which are a form of ground support tower designed for lifting building materials, I think. We used to put one of these on each end of a truss and wind the handles till it went to height. And then we'd have the dubious job of climbing up the masts to focus. Very difficult, very slippery. So one day when I was bored and everyone else was in catering, I invented a sort of climbing aid, which clamped around the mast, and you could very easily climb up and then just step at your leisure onto the truss. So I demonstrated this to everyone when they returned from catering. Unfortunately, I didn't leave it latched to the mast, and it dropped down the mast at speed and hit the locking handle on the winch, dropping my end of the truss and left me on top of the tower like a koala. After that, I thought lighting's not for me. Strangely, I thought rigging was. And as things progressed, we moved to electric motors and what have you, as you're all aware. Tours got bigger and heavier and more complex. And after a few years, I found myself crew chiefing one of the stages, which leapfrogged around, it's a picture behind me, leapfrogged around Europe for the Stones, who were my band when I was a kid. And the rigger had an accident, so I was promoted to rigger. I kind of taught myself how to do it. And I was very proud of myself, having done all the rigging for the first in. Just before the end of the set, the production manager found me and said, "Come on, you're on standby." I said, "What for?" And they had a cherry picker parked between the front of the stage and the barrier, 250,000 people over there, outdoor gig. And I had to drive it as Keith came onto the stage with the opening chords of Satisfaction. I had to pick Nick up in the wings and swoop him over the crowd and put him on the stage. And I guess at the time, that was kind of the hot spot of my career, fulfilling my boyhood dreams of working with the Stones and driving Mick and forcing him into the basket when he was reluctant to get in and throwing him out when he was reluctant to get out. And then soon after that, I'm rushing through my notes here because I'm very conscious that we've got limited time and a lot of things that are interesting to me are quite boring to you guys. I started my own rigging company and continued to be on the road and amassed a load of hoists and what have you. And I started talks with Alan Jacoby of Unusual Rigging. I kind of did the rock and roll. He did the trade shows and what have you. I entered into talks and negotiations with him for a merger, or Unusual buying me out. And we'd got all the contract together and done all the agreements and what have you, but they were unsigned when one Friday night, my business burnt to the ground.
Oh, God.
Bad timing. So I remember standing on the pavement, strangely in the rain, in Brixton, watching my business burn to the ground, thinking, no business, no equipment, very underinsured, no deal. When who should turn up beside me on the pavement but Alan, dear Alan, who said, "Don't worry, we'll do the deal anyway." So from that moment on, he had my 100% loyalty. I became technical director of Unusual Rigging some 30 years ago, and continued to work for the company as technical director in charge of special projects. A special project 30 years ago was one that we'd never heard of and no one knew how to do. So always very challenging, always very interesting, and always very satisfying. But I'm still doing it, believe it or not, because I like the challenge.
I was going to say that the next series of slides definitely fit the title Unusual. I mean, I'll flick on to the next slide. I'll let you explain this one.
Okay, can I just, before we go on to the slides, can I just say that we recently lost Alan to cancer earlier this year, and I'd just like to pay a tribute to him. He was pretty much single-handedly responsible for building up his company, Unusual Rigging, from nothing to probably one of the largest and reputable rigging companies in the world, perhaps. And he was a fantastic guy with ambition, foresight, and although he ran things a little as a dictatorship, with an iron will, he did have a soft, caring side as well. And he's been up to his untimely death, he was a friend to me, more like a brother, in fact. So I just like to pay tribute to a great man here. Thank you.
No, thank you, Robin. And I think that's the thing with our industry. They're not just our colleagues; they're our friends and they are our family. And you said you knew Alan for over 30 years.
Yeah, pretty much nearly 40 years actually, and worked for him and with him for 30. He helped me immensely in my personal life when I got divorced and had to bring up 4 small children on my own. He cut me some slack, afforded me help in every respect, and I loved him madly.
He sounds like a lovely guy.
So as these projects came in over the last 30 years, for me at least, rigging has got wackier and more demanding. This is a Genesis tour where it was very unconventional at the time. 3 huge Jumbotron screens there, each hung from a separate scaffolding tower on wheels, railway type engine type wheels, on tracks, so that they could open up and either be one screen or 3 separate screens and what have you, driven by winches, which we built the winches for that. They're still operational, not those particular ones, but the type. And all the lighting was on these diagonal wires you see, was just ski lift type technology attached to the side, and lighting pods flew up and down those wires. No conventional roof, just a little plastic cover over the band. So that was quite innovative and a lot of job satisfaction there. The only downside, of course, was to listen to Genesis all the time. But moving on.
I'm guessing though, in the early days, a lot of this technology that we take for granted now simply didn't exist. So you were having to source stuff from different industries like ski lifts and railway carts and all this kind of technology of looking at something and going, hold on, that I can repurpose that to do this.
Yeah, I think that was true right from the beginning. Block and tackles, turfers used directly to lift trusses. And in this instance, although trains had been around a long time, rails and tracks, but indeed the winches and the control system we built for this job. Yeah. And the same winches controlled the lighting pods. That was true of the electric motor, basically. It was manual chain box for a while, then electric motors, and because of the way we used them, we got the manufacturers to make them suitable for using motor down rather than just motor up, etc., etc. So yes, I think as anyone watching will know, we should be proud of the fact that we've molded existing technology to suit our needs and put various things together to find solutions for all sorts of different problems.
Yeah. I've just had a good question come in actually from Sean. Did you have anyone who inspired you or mentored you in the early days? I'm not sure if I can say this, Sean. I know you're very, very old, so maybe there was no one doing it before you.
I think I can claim to be the first or one of the first riggers in the UK to start doing it. And remember, rigging wasn't really rigging then, it was just doing what you had to do at the time. America, the USA was ahead of us at the time, and tours used to come to the UK and Europe from America with American riggers who were certainly capable and proficient, but they were used to working in America in venues which had riggers on their staff. So they're used to walking into a building and putting crosses on the floor and having the venue team do the rigging for them. When they got to the UK and Europe, they would walk into a venue, assuming they could find a way in, because there were rarely any staff available at these places. They would walk in and ask for the house riggers, and of course there weren't any. So they relied on the lighting crew and anyone who volunteered to do it for them or help them, which is kind of how I learned.
Yeah.
In answer to your question about mentors, I remember American riggers probably were the people, Joe Brennan, and loads. I can remember half a dozen now, but I can't remember which ones were around right at the beginning. But largely self-taught, I would say.
Yeah. Let me bring the slideshow back up again. There we go. You should be able to see that. So obviously, you don't just do rigging for concerts. Obviously that's where you started, but as you said, you were in charge of special projects, and some of the things that you've done at Unusual, they are bizarre to you know, there's no other word to describe some of the things that you guys get up to. I mean, can you explain this one?
Not just at work. Oh, sorry.
Let's keep it legal, remember, Robin.
Oh, yes. Yes, you're right. This is quite a good example. We were quite involved in the 2012 Olympics in a rigging capacity in the Olympic Stadium and indeed the other venues dotted around London. But this was a cultural event prior to the Olympics to draw attention to them. This was called One Extraordinary Day. This is an American choreographer with a troupe of aerial artistes who she brought over with her and recruited another 20 here in the UK to do 6 aerial stunts in the same day on different iconic buildings in London. And I took this on, and because we were so busy with the Olympics, I ended up kind of doing all the pre-production, the planning, and the in some cases designing and having made the rigging infrastructure on my own, which was very challenging. But I got huge job satisfaction for it. So the stunts involved, here you see a picture of a load of artists bungee jumping off the Millennium Bridge, which they had to do for quite some time. So we had to design a system which allowed them to bounce, and obviously you get slower and slower and slower, and then we hoisted them up to the top, let them go again. So between them there was continual movement for quite some time, and then they were lowered into speedboats and they zoomed off to the next job. That was one. I think I've got pictures of some of the others here.
Now this one fascinates me. And
right, so
you explained it to me and I still don't understand it fully.
Right, this was the biggest challenge in my mind. This was the 6th and final stunts, 10:30 at night, the dark and the wind above the river on the Eye. Prior to the actual show, I had to invent a way that an aerial artiste could slide along a spoke, hands-free, stop themselves when they wanted to, or go downhill when they didn't want to be stationary, so that they could do their choreographed aerial ballet and what have you over 3. I remember it as being 3 revolutions of the wheel that seemed to me to go past in seconds, 30 minutes to rotate. So how we did that, I just invented this sleeve on ropes and pulleys and what have you, which had 2 yachting brakes on it for them to be clipped to. And depending on whether they were going down an inclination to the right or to the left, they would release the relevant rope brake, and enable them to slide down. But the tricky bit was loading them all on whilst the wheel was rotating, and then loading them all off without incident. So they all came up. I was on that little ladder thing you can see there going up from the spindle on the riverside,
yep.
Perched on the top. Bear in mind, this was 10:30 at night, dark, birds and bats flying past. If you look down 400 feet below, the river was moving at quite a rate past you, and boats were moving too. So everything moving, and the wheel was rotating. So they would come up that ladder, to be in between me and the spokes, and I would clip them on properly, make sure they were safe, take up the slack,
Yep.
make sure they were psychologically ready, give them a kiss goodbye, and they'd be gone on the wheel. Loading 32 of them on. And of course, as soon as their particular spoke adopted a downhill angle, they could enter into the show they were doing. It would take their mind off the precarious place they were in. So they all went on with no incident. Huge relief, really, and hugely exhilarating. And then after the 3 rotations, number 1 performer out of 32 who got to 11 o'clock would take the brake off, make their way all the way down the spoke to hit me when it was at 12 o'clock. And I'd have, whatever it was, 15 seconds to dismount them safely and send them on their way before the next one arrived. So when that was complete and they were all back home on land, safe, that was one of the most exhilarating moments, I think, in my rigging repertoire. Fantastic. It's what rigging's all about in my book.
I was going to say, you've explained this photo to me twice now, and I still look at it going, where on earth do you start with that? I mean, to me, that is terrifying, but I know to you that it's kind of almost second nature. So where do you start in the planning of something like this, and how long were you planning to do this?
I was planning this for about 3 months. This and the other 5 events, along with all the other projects I was doing. But the secret, I think, is to make it look terrifying, and to make it look dangerous, and to make it look gung-ho and look awesome when it happens, but to know that you've taken measures to make it absolutely safe, as safe as possible, and put contingency plans in. Like I could stop the wheel at any time. I knew because of the size of it, it took 7 feet where my face was before it actually stopped after my cue. But all sorts of things like that, rescue plans and rehearsals. So you just put measures in place to make sure that it happens, and take great pleasure in the fact that it does.
I'm guessing by the time you get to the actual event, you've tested it and you've run it so many times.
Well, we did indeed test the systems that I put on the spokes off-site.
Yeah.
Very few rehearsals on the eye because, of course, you can't do it behind closed doors, and they didn't want to give anything away. So I think that we had 1 dress rehearsal on the eye at a very antisocial time of night, I think.
That's amazing. And then
so again, off the wall
as well.
Rather off the wall stuff. We were tasked with putting 30 or 40 spacecraft and satellites in the Leicester, the National Space Centre. 2 monsters, which are these, the Blue Streak and the Thor Able. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the venue. You've probably seen it. This particular tower is a bit like a Michelin Man, like a load of air cushions, which they left the front off the building to allow us to install these 2 things. The Thor Able is just a rocket, it's a similar construction to a bus or something. But the Blue Streak on the right, that's a little bit like a Coca-Cola can, which is only has any structural integrity when it's full of Coca-Cola. When it's empty, you can crush it very easily. If you go to the next slide.
I know which slide you're asking for.
Okay. Well, that's me hoovering them when we'd done it and the front of the building had been replaced. But the Blue Streak, it appeared on site in a frame, horizontally mounted in a frame, looked like the 40-foot trailer you see behind an Arctic. It was pressurized and it was stretched to avoid it creasing or collapsing because there was no fuel inside it. So we had to hang it up in its frame. Very awkward, and then hang it independently of the frame and take the frame away. Which, nowadays doesn't seem that challenging, but at the time it was very, very different to what we were used to, and we were quite chuffed to be able to pull that off. There's a series of, and that's what, right to this day, they're still in there. They're still in there because no one knows how to get them out, actually.
You're waiting for the phone call to take them back out again. I'm guessing.
No,
when-
the day before I retire, I'm going to call them and mention it.
Yeah.
So again, you know, over the years we've been tasked, or I've been tasked with hanging up all sorts of different aircraft and spacecraft, which I find very interesting. One of the most interesting things is the difference between one sort of aircraft and another. I believe this is a Sopwith Camel. You know, trying to hang that up is a bit like hanging up a blancmange. It's made of tissue paper and balsa wood and what have you, and difficult to find hard points, but nevertheless a challenge. So it's always a challenge to suspend them safely, which includes attaching to them safely. It's a challenge to get them from their flat and level orientation on the ground to the frisky orientations often required. So there's a picture of quite a few different sorts here.
Yeah.
If you've got time. So that's a Hunter, I think, and that's a bit misleading in the picture, but that's completely on its side, one wing up, one wing down, and nose down. Getting that from flat and level to that orientation was a challenge. This is RAF Cosford, which is an installation I'm extremely proud of, 15 aircraft or so, heaviest 50 tons, although we only suspended the nose of that one. And I think there's some shots of some more of them here.
Yeah. So this one you were explaining to me is actually quite interesting, because this is hung vertically in the roof, isn't it?
Yeah, that's because
How
it's an electric lightning, and it's famous even now for being the aircraft which climbs at the fastest rate. So they wanted to display it, illustrating this climb, vertical climb. We built a frame for that, which we put to attach to the undercarriage points. So basically we flew the frame with the aircraft on it to get this orientation. And then the permanent rigging system goes down through the air intake in the nose and branches off inside and attaches to the points where the aircraft engines, had they been there, would attach to the fuselage, strong points obviously. So the rigging is extremely minimalist, which is, you know, what you're after. You're after these fantastic, incredible pieces, aircraft, catching the eye of the visitors, and if they can't see the rigging, that's a winner in my book.
I'm guessing it's kind of a compromise of, you know, where are the rigging points that you can utilize within the building, where's the rigging points that you can utilize on the object that you're hanging, and then trying to do that in a way which is artistic. You want the audience to focus on the object, not focus on the rigging that's holding the object up. I mean, how close do you tend to find from what the client's brief is to the final product that you're able to produce?
Well, we aim at meeting the brief and exceeding expectations always. And we always think when we're looking at the finished product that we can see the rigging because we're riggers and we put it there. But a lot of people's attention is still drawn to the aircraft before the rigging, which is what we're after. Hopefully we're successful. We've hung 200 or 300 up, I would have thought. Lost count a long time ago.
What on earth is going on here?
Here's another crazy one. Liverpool, city of culture. Now that's crazy enough, isn't it? Apparently, they had the tallest cathedral in the UK in Liverpool until someone stole the wheels, and then another one became the tallest. Sorry, it's a joke. So this was to celebrate City of Culture here, and we were tasked with coming up with and talking to the show's designers, which we did. And the theme was that we would walk this colossal mechanical spider with 14 operators incorporated in it. It was robotic and controlled from within with 1 or 2 umbilicals. And it would walk all the way through the streets of Liverpool. One of the triumphs was with health and safety, in as much as when they mentioned the vast cost of barriering off the route to keep pedestrians away, Alan, convinced them extraordinarily they didn't need any barriers whatsoever. And any crowd who had this walking towards them would part and allow.
Yep.
And they did, and it went without hitch. So I was tasked with walking this thing up the front of a derelict building, I think there's, and there it is. So I designed the lifting system, and it was lifted by a crane and then transferred onto my lifting system. And I had to wander around on the front of the building. Very hazardous for lots of reasons. A, it weighed an awful lot. B, it's a robot and moves around. So not only did its C of G change dramatically, but each limb and its mandibles and all that could punch through one of the windows at any time and become caught. Plus it had 14 operators in it. Lovely, crazy French people who I had to take care of. Anyway, I walked it up the building, and then it curled up and went to sleep for the night. And then we had to get all the operators out, relatively straightforward rope access operation, and then put them back in the following morning for it to walk around some more and then disappear. So this is a sort of, we had all sorts of issues, like we had to prop up a few floors beneath the roof to get the load bearing capacity up to what we required. I think it weighed 12 tons. So, you know, it was heavier than the capacity of the lifting gear we had on the shelf. So we had to devise a crafty system for lifting it. And that was a huge challenge, and got great job satisfaction from doing that.
Do you ever get a project come to you where you just think that can't be done? Or
No.
I was going to say, but some of the things that you've done, and anybody else would just take one look and just go, "You've got to be kidding!" But you specialize in doing the things that other people think are impossible.
Yeah, when we're lucky enough for those projects to come along, yes, I do, and we do. That's absolutely right. Not to say that there are an awful lot of other very accomplished riggers both in the events industry and elsewhere who couldn't do this.
Yeah,
let's not pretend that you know, there's a huge amount of extremely talented riggers out there, and there have been for some time. And given a challenge like this, you know, a huge number of them could rise to it, I'm sure. One likes to think, though, that one's success in a project like this brings more similar things, or at least the same wacky factor things to us. It's fantastic. Look at it. It's what's the expression? Hairs on the back of my neck are going like this, just looking at it.
It's fantastic. And then obviously
You've got images
So
like this. So
this was
I find this heartbreaking because I love Harriers, but I understand why you're having to chop it up.
okay.
from
So out
next
of the
images.
200 or 250 aircraft that I've hung up, all but 2 were we had to conserve. We couldn't change the fabric of the aircraft. We had to put the attachment points on so that they could be removed later when the aircraft returned to its original state. You know, they're museum pieces not to be tampered with. Not this. This was an art installation for an artist called Fiona Banner, who came to us and said, I've got a commission to put something in the Tate Britain, and I want you to come with me on a field trip tomorrow. So I accompanied her, and we went to this sort of stately home in near Ipswich, and it was a kind of steptoe and son arrangement, parked outside instead of the Rolls Royce and Aston Martins you'd expect, where was an old tractor, an old lawnmower, and a dead helicopter, and a couple of concrete bears, you know. And as you walked into the mansion, same thing, full-size snooker table where someone had put an engine on top of it and was taking it apart. There were statues, stuffed animals, all sorts of steptoe and son type stuff everywhere. Whilst we were in there talking to the owner, his son came in with a hat box and pulled Margaret Thatcher's head out. they had nine prime ministers, perfect waxwork replicas of their heads, which they showed off to us during the meeting. Madness. In the garden, there was this harrier and a jaguar in rusty pieces. And we were tasked with recovering them, taking them back to our yard, refurbishing them into not the original aircraft that they were, but they had to look like the original aircraft that they were, but cutting them up into pieces, which would allow them to go into the limited access into the Tate Britain, so that this one could be hung like that and painted like the feathers of a dove, or sorry, not a dove, a bird of prey diving. That was hung 6 inches off the floor, and we had to put the supports in above that skylight there to take the weight, and we had to design into the rigging the fact that, as you can imagine, visitors would push it and swing it around. So we had to incorporate that into the rigging to allow that to happen without it becoming dangerous.
I hadn't even taken that into account when I first saw the image that people would do that.
Schoolboys, yeah, I would, wouldn't you? Swing it if you saw it.
Now you've said it, yeah, absolutely.
So that was a challenge. And the other one, next slide, was chromed and as you can see, positioned upside down. Quite proud of that as an art exhibition. And the interest there for me was that we weren't treating the aircraft in the normal way. We were forget they were aircraft and see them as objets d'art, which I think you'll agree they're beautiful. So all this comes in under the heading of rigging, and it's all weird and wacky, and it's not just hanging motors and truss up, but all the skills learned in rock and roll and those years of rigging can be transferred onto all sorts of things like this, which is so interesting, so fantastic. On this one, as part of the Olympics, well, the Paralympics in this case, we were tasked with flying that chap up the front of this orbit tower with the Olympic torch, and then flying him over the Olympic Stadium and putting him down on the center spot to deliver the torch to the games. Quite a challenge, bloody miles, and it was very windy, and there's lots of Dyneema ropes and all that, and this very extremely asymmetrical anchor points and route up the front of the tower, as you can see. And the odd thing about that was that we designed the whole thing for his weight. The guy had no legs, so he used to wear prosthetic legs. So we designed the whole thing for his weight and where his CFG was, having experimented like that. The day before the actual show, the opening of the Paralympics, he developed an infection, unfortunately, and wasn't able to wear his legs. So we had CFG problems.
Of course.
Think quickly and modify his harness to account for the fact that his CFG was too high, fall out of harness. But that went smoothly. Again, another crazy thing, but worked.
I'm just going to go through some of the questions that we're getting through here, Robin, before we move on. Anne is asking, hi Robin, with all your experience and knowledge of the rigging industry and the emphasis in reducing carbon in future installations, tours, etc., what do you see as the best way to maintain a safe industry for performers? For example, have you come across the use of lighter weight materials, cross-laminated timber, for example, or in any of your installations?
Yeah, I'm sure there are examples of that sort of thing. The thing that springs to mind is that all aerial artistes should be naked with no sandwich boxes and no tools and what have you. Sorry, joking. I think everybody is making advances in the, as far as materials go. And it seems to me that it's for years and years and years in the rock and roll touring world, I presume you're talking about the touring situation, stages and what have you with the wooden laminates. The tradition has been that the shows get heavier, more complex, therefore more equipment, therefore more trucks, more labor, more hotels, eating more food, and everything is geared towards bigger and heavier and bigger and heavier. Yeah. I think technology is going to change now, and everything with the circular economy in mind, recycling and sustained systems and what have you, and coupled with the virtual world of you can give the audience a fantastic experience virtually. So these things are somehow going to morph into a much less wasteful and better system of getting entertainment around the world and showing it to millions of people, I'm sure. You know, the strange situation we're going through at the moment, this COVID crisis, which has crippled our industry. I'm optimistic that our industry is, both the rigging and the wider industry, is versatile and good at problem solving and good at adapting. And I think we'll all come together with what you have just mentioned in mind and reshape the future so that we're much more responsible and you know, hopefully we can get our livelihoods back to not normal. Be terrible if it was normal, back to how we remember it.
Yeah,
work on it into the future.
Yeah. I've had a couple of questions come in about TFA.
Yeah.
Please ask Robin about TFA. It's where it all happened.
TFA was a sound company who bought a lighting company, or sorry, TFA was a lighting company, Tom Field Associates, American, who bought a sound company called Electrosound, and the managing director and owner was Ricky Farr, son of a boxer. Based in Marshalsea Road, they were a big provider of lighting and sound equipment. And indeed, when I first, just before I formed my own rigging company, I joined up with a chap called Simon Woodruff, who you may have heard of Yo Sushi fame. And we were partners in a subsidiary of Electrosounds called S2 to mirror an American engineering company called M2. And we operated for a couple of years until our parent company went bust. Simon and I parted. I started my first rigging company, and Simon went on as one of the incredibly successful entrepreneur and very daring with his opportunities and his adventures to make Yo Sushi from scratch and then sell it for millions. Bosh. Last time I spoke to him, he was gadding around on an island in the Pacific. And whereas I've steadily downhill ever since, and I'm still skint.
Shall we bring in Nicky?
Yes, please do. So, yeah, the segue here, is that the word, segue? The lead into Nicky is that when I first started, there were no safety, there was no health and safety, no harnesses, no nothing. And we've moved a hell of a long way forward from here, and Nicky's going to tell us about the National Rigging Certificate. Hi.
Hi, Nicky. How are you? You well?
I missed what Robin said as I was coming in, but I've listened to the presentation so far. Simply amazing. He's just amazing what he's done. Normally we're arguing, actually, so it's quite nice to say that as we're in public in a good way. So yes, so well, I guess it all started a little while ago. If we're talking about the NRC, I guess that's why I'm coming in. I think with all the advances that have happened, there clearly was a demand for something, and this process really started back in 2004. If we can go to perhaps what it is first, talk through what the NRC is. So essentially, the NRC is a measurement of somebody's competence, that's their skills, knowledge and experience, to a set of industry agreed standards that were set by the rigging industry. We use, if I can explain this one, so it's essentially made up of units, as you can see here, and we have two levels, the level 2 which is the rigger, and the rigging supervisor, which we've put at level 3. So with the units, what we wanted to do was to ensure that we covered the kind of mandatory skills which everybody has to do. So your communication, health and safety, making sure, you ensure others are safe, etc. And also in the level 3, that you can carry out a risk assessment, and also that you can supervise, because it's all about the people skills as well.
Yeah.
And then we have the technical units, which are about rigging techniques, and also about working at height, using personal fall protection systems. So that's the other units within there. And although you've got these separate units, which basically have in them statements of performance objectives, what you should do, and also underpinning knowledge, what you should know. The way that the assessment has been designed is that you can come along to a centre in 2 days and produce your evidence to demonstrate that you have met the standard. Okay, so it's an assessment that's done over 2 days, and we can do that because the experience that somebody has, they are bringing in evidence to show that they have this experience. So we're looking at their experience, that they have that. We're looking at their knowledge, that they have knowledge through written questions. And we're also looking at that they can actually do the job, so the practical skill. So we designed 2 scenarios for them to go through in the level 2. And in the level 3, we have a day that they come into the centre, but we also made sure we don't believe you can simulate supervision. You can either do that or not. We work in a dynamic industry, so it's important to make sure that people under pressure can actually do that job of supervision. So that's always done in a real job. And I think the best analogy has always been the driving test in some way. So that's what we're doing here. So there's not training involved. How you get to take your NRC, how you've learned it, could be training courses, needs to have experience. So these are people that are at the point of actually being able to work independently in level 2. And in level 3, obviously they can supervise. And now you need to have the level 2 in order to take your level 3, if that makes sense. So that's really taking this whole thing down into something quite serious, following Robin, but that's essentially what the NRC is.
But I'm guessing that, technology is changing all the time. So you're constantly having to update this as new standards come in, as new bits of equipment come in, as Robin comes up with some new bit of technology, that's suddenly
Robin answer this one. He's going to go in.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised, actually, that good practice remains good practice throughout this, and has done. We've made some changes and some upgrades and what have you. But when you do rigging using good practice, that's alongside all the advances in technology. It's the same technique. So you'd be surprised at how little we have to update it, although there is a process which we stick to do just that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have regular standardization meetings that go on within the NRC to make sure, and obviously because the assessors are all they practice rigging, so therefore we're constantly in understanding what's going on, and if there are any changes, what we need to do to update as well. So yeah.
So you obviously had to come up with a definition of rigging. How did you decide on this, and how did that come about?
Yeah, so if we go right back, how did the NRC kind of come about, I suppose? I think the most powerful thing about it is it was driven by the industry. So the people that really started the very beginning of this was Oz Marsh, Eric Porter, Chris Higgs, and Mark Armstrong. And they actually went to AJ at Unusual first and spoke about the training that they had developed. And at this point, this was training. And AJ said, well, go and speak to PLASA, see what they could do. And that was my first, if you like, contact with the rigging industry. So we met and discussed it, and we said, okay, let's see what we could do. At the time, we had Becky Laughlin, who was from Vertigo Rigging, and she was on the board of PLASA. So I spoke to her about it, and we decided that actually, if we do this, we need to have all the rigging companies together. That was quite important. And so we formed what became the NRAG. So we got all the rigging companies together, and with the idea of developing a national rigging certificate. And so I think the first thing they decided was actually they didn't want it to be training at this point. They wanted it to be assessment. It was a benchmark. And so the definition of rigging, this definition is around the scope of what we're talking about when we're assessing. Yep. Because as Robin will tell you, in the film industry, rigging means something different to what we're doing. So that's kind of how it started really in those early days. So that took ages. So we you can imagine, you know, every word is analysed, thought through, discussed, whatever. And then the next thing we had to look at, well, if that's the definition of rigging in the scope of what we're doing here, what is a rigger? So the next one was a definition of the rigger. This took a long time as well, and this is what it became.
There you go.
One
But it's amazing the debates that happened. And following the definition, the next stage was to start to look at what would be the essential skills that somebody has. And we were looking at the minimum core requirements of somebody that was undertaking rigging, not everything. You know, you've just seen Robin, who's at the top of the tree, really, in terms of what he does. We know many people that have their NRC have huge other skills, lots of other skills. But what we're looking is a minimum core requirements so that we can just see that they've got that. A bit like the driving test again, isn't it? In that sense, you know. So that's what we did next. And then we worked on actually with the model. I also met somebody called Tony Bond, who had a similar scheme of looking at units. And that's kind of what we've based some of this on as well. So he was great. So we kind of got some ideas going from there. So we started to look at, because there were no occupational standards for our industry. So we started to look at other industries and what we could use and change and adapt in order to create those units of assessment for our industry. So that carried on with the NRAG. Robin, what would you say about those days in the NRAG, or the early days when you first came together?
Well, yeah, the NRAG was formed. I'm sorry, I was answering a question then, but I wasn't listening. Nothing changes there. So the NRAG was formed to give PLASA technical advice when they're putting a scheme together. The scheme had to be put together in line with other approved government schemes, which is why the definition of a rigger and silly things like that were required. There was a hell of a lot of work. It was very well done. It took an awful long time. And the NRAG, having delivered that brief, when the NRC was up and running, was disbanded and reformed with a wider brief to, their mission statement is to produce guidance and see what they can do, putting aside their commercial differences to further safety and best practice or good practice in the industry as we know it. Although we do still have a very close relationship with PLASA and communicate with them all the time about delivering the NRC at the two centres, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think the thing for me, Phil, was that these companies came together, and previously they had been competitors, you know. Yeah, and it was a phenomenal change because they just all worked on this, you know, and they had a shared yeah, it was just an amazing experience to be part of, and all voluntarily as well. And so I think those relationships that we still see going on have also impacted, I think, really well on the industry in that way, because it was quite something, and is quite something, I think, the way that they are now, as well, with each other.
I think it's testament to our industry as a whole, because we've discussed this. Myself and Nicky work a lot on We Make events, and we've seen it that we've seen companies which are direct competitors with each other, that when a situation arises, that you just need to kind of drop the egos and the differences and come together for the greater good of the industry, so that you can put these kind of things in place. So the NRC, the MRAGs, obviously all the work that we're doing with We Make events at the moment, it goes beyond being about companies. It's about individuals. It's about making sure that safety is the forefront of our industry, that we are all pushing and working towards a common goal. And I don't think you get that in some other industries. You would never get Jaguar and BMW sitting down at a table in the same way that you do in our industry. I think
it's to do with, in my experience anyway, it's about finding solutions quickly. You have to find that solution. So the framework of people and how they are is kind of different in that sense, to make something happen. And I think the collaboration, the best thing about this was, the collaboration of everybody coming together. Same as you say, there's lots of similarities in the sense that everybody's contribution is needed and valuable. It isn't one person, and even in what we did with the NRC, it was a massive collective effort to do that, and everybody contributed to that process. So yeah, and I think now it's amazing, because you look at the fact that the industry now has, which it didn't have before, it has a standard, if you like, for people to have recognition as well for what they do. I can remember once I was in, I think it was the NEC, and we were giving out certificates to people, and it was a really, it was quite early on in the early days, and one of the guys actually was really emotional about getting this certificate, and he said, that's the first time in my life I've had a certificate. I'd never had one before. And that's not obviously everyone, but the point is, people should get something, recognition for what they do. It's not all about having, a degree or this or that. Vocational competence is really important, I think, to be able to recognize.
And in typical fashion, we've run out of time.
Yeah,
That went in seconds. I've got a few questions that I want to give to you guys. And then there is one last slide which I need Robin to explain, because it makes me laugh when you look at this slide. Let's go to some questions. What have we got? Question from Mark. Attitudes to health and safety in the events industry have changed significantly over the last 30 years. I just lost the end of that question, John. Is already, hold on, let me go to answered. Sorry, 2 seconds. Attitudes to health and safety in the events industry have changed significantly over the last 30 years. Do you believe that this is limited creative rigging solutions, or do you believe it's driven technological advances? Yeah, go for it, Robin.
I think that ever since I picked up my first rope and first shackle, the attitude towards health and safety within our capabilities has been exactly the same as it is now. That every responsible rigger and everyone else involved spends all their time trying to come up with solutions trying to maintain the safe environment for their colleagues and themselves. It's okay, it's virtual. And the only changes is that now, of course, the health and safety executive are a recognised body and turn up with clipboards and check you out. So they see that you're doing your duty and keeping everyone safe, and you have to comply with all the paperwork, the risk assessments, the method statements. You have to use qualified people with certificates. You have to use equipment with certificates, correctly rated, stick to the lifting plan, et cetera, which is kind of just a formal way of doing what every responsible rigger has always done in their career. Yep. And all the paperwork. So I don't think it's limited creative solutions. I think it's just made a hell of a lot more work. It's a good thing. I think it's a great, good thing. We're all about finding solutions to problems and finding solutions to how to document the way you're keeping everything safe and everybody safe, which can be scrutinized by the health and safety executive or anyone else, is a very good thing.
Yeah. Let's have a look at some others. Gareth, I registered on the trainee rigger scheme a year ago or so. Obviously, the virus has been pretty bad for the industry this year. Does Robin feel there will be enough trainees and riggers in the UK events industry once the industry restarts?
I think it's anybody's guess when and in what form exactly the industry will restart, but I'm confident that it will. And there will always be a demand for riggers and trainee riggers who prove to be competent, responsible, and operate with safety in mind, and the others will fall by the wayside. So go for it, mate.
If people are thinking of getting into rigging, where would they start? What would you recommend?
Contact the rigging companies, I think, first of all. Wouldn't you, Robin? In terms of, there are good rigging companies out there to start off with, seeing if you can get in, and they do their own apprenticeships as well internally. That's one way of starting off.
Yeah, it is under normal circumstances. It might be difficult to, everybody's trying to survive at the moment. Doing the
it's a different world at the moment. But
it's a very different world. Yeah. But, where there's a will, there's a way. And if you monitor the industry and see when it comes back and springs to life, then getting in touch with rigging companies, riggers, becoming a local crew person, signing up to the trainee rigger scheme, there are all sorts of ways in.
Question from Gary. If you had to select one single project as your legacy, what would it be?
Bringing up 4 kids on my own.
Harder than anything you've ever worked on.
Ooh, absolutely right. It's very difficult to select one, but I think that Streb one on the wheel and these 2 projects which had all the ingredients that I love. Hugely difficult, hugely challenging, both involving the safety of others and being responsible for that, and both hugely spectacular, fantastically spectacular, and hugely successful and off the wall.
You mind me asking, Robin, how old are you? Because you clearly still get a buzz out of this.
I'm 70.
You're 17. You've been doing this, what, 40 years plus
40 plus, yeah.
And you still love it. The sparkle is still in your eye.
I've over the last 2 of the last 3 weeks, I've been getting up at 5:30 in the morning to go to a site in North London to install this incredible sculpture in a very confined, very heavy, but incredible sculpture in a very confined space. And I love it.
You've clearly got no intention of retiring, have you?
Couple of years, and then I reckon there might be another life for me somewhere, doing something as challenging and inventive, but involving sunshine and beer and beaches and stuff. Who knows?
Sounds terrible. You'd hate it, Robin. You'd absolutely hate it.
Probably.
I'm going to bring up this last slide because we are massively overrunning here. So explain
Well,
this slide to me.
that was when I first started my first rigging company, Zenavel Limited, and I needed a logo. And whilst all of my friends, some of whom knew something about rigging and some didn't, were crawling all over the NEC, rigging a huge car launch, I was creating the logo for my T-shirts and my paperwork and what have you. And that's me, I have to say, 6 inches off the floor, posing for the photographer. Well, they all laughed and cheered and threw things at me from the roof.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you, Robin. It's been a pleasure. And I know we could have quite easily filled another couple of hours of stories and slides that you had, some of which I had to take out. So I was just like, I can't put that photo in on this.
I missed out 2 paragraphs on sex and drugs and rock and roll. Maybe next time.
Indeed. If we do it again, we will cover those topics off and definitely make sure we get legal advice on that beforehand. Thank you, Nicky, for joining us. If you have got any questions about the NRC, what's the best way to get those questions to you, Nicky?
If you go to the website, which I think John is going to share, the website on PLASA, and just use where it asks you, it'll say there to go into that, then we'll get those questions coming through. And also I think we're going to share where you can download the NRAG guidance documents, because that's something that they do. They're freely available again on the PLASA website. So that's probably the best thing to do, to go to the PLASA website, go to the page. If you're interested in the NRC or further questions, use info@plaza.org or rigging@plaza.org. It's all there for you to find, and I will get to them. We'll get to them, so we'll be able to give them some answers.
Fantastic. If you do want to find out more about We Make Events, you can go to wemakeevents.com, where we've got lots of information about the campaign and all the activities that we've done so far. If you go onto our YouTube channel, you'll be able to view this and all of our previous Fireside chats, if you want to catch up on those. Coming up in the next few days, on Tuesday the 29th, we have Kevin Eld talking to us. Kevin started off in Leicester at the Haymarket, and he's now head of creative entertainment at Walt Disney Imagineering in LA. So that is going to be a fascinating talk to see how he went from one to the other. On the Tuesday the 5th of January, I'm then back talking to Colin Norfield about his 50 years as a sound engineer, mixing for a list of bands which is even longer than the one that Robin had at the start of this, believe it or not. And then on Tuesday the 7th, we've got our final Fireside chat, which is going to be the members of the We Make Events steering group talking about the 9 months, I think it is, we've been doing this, Nicky.
Yeah.
About how we started, the journey that we've all taken in We Make Events, the fundraising, the campaigning, the political work that we've been doing. How we're going to squeeze that into an hour, I'm not quite sure, but again, it's going to be fascinating to look back at everything that we've achieved up until this point and the things that we are planning for the future. Again, if you want to have a look at the NRAG information, it is www.plaza.org/NRAG. And there is also information on there about qualifications and the National Rigging Certificate. Again, thank you, Robin and Nicky. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you.
John, thank you so much for working all the magic in the background, as you always do for us. Couldn't do it without you. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy your Christmas. and have a great new year. And speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.